How does Thomas Hardy strikingly create feelings of loneliness and loss in the voice? Well, partly it's through the language he uses, which we will look at now. The language in stanza 1. Well, the poem begins with the word woman, woman much missed, which does two things. Firstly, it immediately tells us, the reader, the subject of the poem. We know that the poem is about a woman, who we're going to assume is Emma, because it was written just after she died, and it was one of the elegies that he wrote in 1912 and 1913 about the death of Emma. Secondly, it provides distance and impersonality. It makes it impersonal. It doesn't tell us the name of the woman, it just calls her woman. It's not darling or sweetheart or any other type of endearment. It's just an impersonal woman. Woman much missed, how you call to me, call to me. This repetition in the first stanza of call to me is important. He hasn't done this by accident. Hardy has done this on purpose. It kind of sounds like an echo. Why does he do this? Well, first, maybe because he feels like he's in a cycle of grief from which he can't escape. Particularly looking back at the previous poem that we studied, The Going, in which you can see the stages of grief that Hardy's going through. And he feels, or he might have felt, like he was trapped inside this cycle of grief. And the echo makes us think of that. Also, maybe it sounds like the wind. The wind sometimes sounds like an echo. The repetition of the same sounds, like echo, 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 echo. Also, maybe it foreshadows. Foreshadow is give a hint of something that's going to happen in the future, particularly used in literature. Maybe it foreshadows the doubt that the speaker shows later on in the poem. He's not sure if actually the voice he hears is the woman or if it's just the wind. And an echo is unsubstantial. It's not substantial, it's not big and powerful and important. So maybe this links to the fact that he doubts himself. Also, is it a call for help? Does he really want to hear Emma's voice? And he's hoping that he can hear her talking. He's hoping for a voice from the other side of the grave, or maybe he's hoping that she's still alive and this has all been a bad dream for him. And this is linked with the last line of the poem, which finishes with, and the woman calling. Woman much missed, how you call to me, saying that now you are not as you were when you had changed from the one who was all to me, but as at first, when our day was fair. Here, Thomas Hardy is looking back fondly on their previous relationship, when their day was fair, when they were happy. And this is nostalgic. Nostalgic means to look back at something fondly, to look back on a happier time, and it makes you happy. And this makes us see that Thomas Hardy is thinking back to his previous happy relationship with Emma. But is he looking back with rose-tinted spectacles? Rose-tinted spectacles means when you look back to the past and see it as happy and happier than it actually was. Like in the future, you might look back on your time at school and think that it was all great, that you had fun with your friends, and you would forget about all the hard work that you had to do. You'd look back and just see it as a happy time. And that's looking back with rose-tinted spectacles. Is Thomas Hardy doing this here? Maybe. Language in stanza 2. Well, this stanza opens with a question. Can it be you that I hear? This is the first feeling of doubt that the speaker shows. He's questioning if it really is the woman that he can hear. Is it her? He really hopes so. He really hopes that it is the woman, or it is Emma, that he can hear, because he desperately misses her. So he's hoping that it is her. In both stanzas 1 and 2, it is mostly monosyllabic words that are used. Monosyllabic, remember, means words with only one syllable. Mono means one. And these monosyllabic words show a sense of his numb grief. His grief that he just can't escape from. He is so grief-stricken that this even comes across in his language. When monosyllabic words are used, it's quite sharp. It's not flowing and beautiful, it is sharp, almost like a drum beat. And Hardy might have used these to show to show his sadness and his grief. The exception in stanza 2 is original, which, if you count it out, has 3 syllables. Sorry, 4. Original. And this is when he's describing her air blue gown, when he's looking back on the time at the beginning of their relationship when everything was happy. And perhaps he wants to lift the mood momentarily when he remembers this happier memory. Again, the whole of stanza 3 is a question, because it starts with, or is it, and ends with a question mark. This enforces the ever deepening sense of doubt that Hardy has, that actually this is the voice of Emma he can hear. He's questioning whether the voice is Emma. He's questioning himself. Is it really Emma he can hear? Maybe. Maybe it's the wind. And this is the first time that the wind is introduced. And it shows his doubt. These words, listlessness and wistlessness, they stand out in this stanza. They stand out because they're long. Listlessness, wistlessness, both have 3 syllables, and they use consonants, which we will look at in imagery. But they repeat the S sounds 3 times in each word. Why does Hardy want to emphasize these 2 words? Maybe because they're both negative, and they're both words that lack energy. It means that they don't have energy. And they describe the wind and the woman. Listlessness describes the wind. Wistlessness describes the woman. Also, with the word listlessness, is it Hardy describing himself in reaction to Emma's death? He's lost all energy. He's lost all his enthusiasm in life because of her death. So is this linked to how Thomas Hardy feels himself? The setting. This is the first time in the poem that the setting is described, and it's described as a wet mead, a wet field. And it gives a feeling of chilliness, which means coldness, and damp, which means wet. Is it ghost-like? Well, it definitely has a spooky feeling and a spooky setting. Imagine if it was a ghost story. You might have a setting which is chilly and damp and wet because it adds to the atmosphere. And this use of wet mead definitely adds to the sad, chilly and spooky atmosphere of this poem, which perfectly goes along with Thomas Hardy's feelings. Thus I, faltering forward, leaves around me, wind oozing thin through the thorn from Norwood, and the woman calling. The breeze that we saw in stanza 3 has suddenly become a wind, which emphasizes the change of mood in this stanza. Breeze is soft, and wind is strong. So the word wind perfectly emphasizes the change of mood in this stanza, the change of mood of the speaker, who is throughout stanzas 1, 2, and 3, he's been hoping, wishing that it was the woman's voice that he could hear. In this stanza, he has come crashing back down to earth, to the harsh reality of life, and the word wind emphasizes this. The word oozing, used here, makes us think of mud or blood, which is seeping out. The word oozing, when it's used in this stanza, is not a good word. Its connotations are negative and pretty gross. You can imagine blood or pus oozing out of something. Pretty gross. The wind oozing thin is an oxymoron because it's both thick. When something oozes, it's thick, and it's thin. The word thin is used here. It's as though the wind is mocking the speaker, making fun of him in his grief. The woman calling is repetition, again, back to the beginning of the poem, when it says how you call to me, and it finishes with, and the woman calling. This bitter distancing of himself, the speaker, from the woman who is calling proves that this woman is not indeed Emma, but it's some random woman on the wind who is causing this episode of the whole poem. And it confirms the finality of his loss. It confirms that Emma really has died. He cannot hear her because she's dead. It's just some random woman or the wind. The fact that this poem finishes with how it started, does this emphasize his call for help? Maybe. So you can see how I hope you can see how Thomas Hardy has used language to emphasize and strikingly create feelings of loneliness and loss in this poem.